The story this memorial tells actually begins before the story of the Komagata Maru incident. In 1908, with racial tensions high in Canada, the government passed a set of rules that would prohibit immigration to Canada if you didn't come directly from your originating location. This regulation was named the Continuous Journey Regulation and was a culprit of the tragic event that would happen years later. Although not all Canadians desired this law, fear of losing jobs and livelihood spread from coast to coast, which I'll be talking about later. But this fear can relate to today and the fear of not knowing whether people are going to have COVID or not, or something along the lines of that. Fear is what you see a lot in history, and it's actually a culprit of a lot of bad, this unknowing and this fear. It wasn't really fair because of the fact that they all coming around the same time, and I'll talk about that a little bit later about the roots. But yeah, so basically started with that act saying you had to in order to come to um, Canada from another country, it had to be a continuous journey, so no stops along the way. But that was impossible from India at the time, so which didn't really make sense because also at the time India is part of the British monarchy, which meant that there should be you're allowed to travel between either way, back and forth. Any kind of countries or nations in the British monarchy should be able to people should be able to live within the two. But a kind of a sly way of getting around that was that Continuous Journey Regulation Act. Set by the government.
But what was the Continuous Journey Act? What did that say?
So yeah, like I said, it was basically saying that you can't come to Canada unless it's a continuous journey from where you came from, and that was it's basically a discriminatory act because from India that's not possible.
So you'd have to stop somewhere along the way if you're coming from India.
But in 1914, kind of the start of the war, kind of before the war, but near the start, a guy by the name of Baba Gurdeep Singh got 300 people from India, mainly from the Punjab region, so mostly Sikh people, like 370 Sikh people, 370 or 340 Sikh people, to come from India to Canada, kind of almost to challenge the the discriminatory law, as well as come live in these a new life in Canada, which was the common interest back at the time because.
Are they coming for work?
They're coming from work for a better life, basically, because in India it was a pretty horrible place to live in, and they're like, oh well, I'm part of the British monarchy. I've been fighting for the Queen, or under the Queen's name, for when I'm in the army, so I should be able to just go support my family and live in Canada. There's more opportunities. So, 300 people aboard the ship went to Canada, arrived in Cole Harbour, basically in BC. But when they got there, the Port Authority, or actually government organization, said, no, you cannot come ashore. You cannot leave your boat. You must anchor offshore because this law or this regulation we created said you can't. So it's a law, so now you can't. And they're like, no, that's not fair. We just traveled 2 months, horrible conditions in a packed boat. It wasn't any sort of cruise or anything. So when they got there, they just wanted to go get off the boat and live their lives, but they weren't allowed to, and the government didn't provide food or water, and the only way they survived was by the community forming in Vancouver called the Khalsa Diwan Society, and they raised money for food and water in order to keep them alive, basically. And it was hard-earned money, so it's kind of showing kind of build the strength of community, and you can see that today in the Khalsa Diwan Society is still here around and still holds strong to those roots. So that's basically the scroll around the anchor. So yeah, so basically the memorial, and how do we memorialize that? And we decided that since an anchor represents a boat, but also represents a permanence and the roots of
setting down roots, right?
Of the event. We chose an anchor, and basically for this event, it represented the importance to Canada, this ship, but also the immigrants had in our roots, and what it meant for this event meant for South Asian rights in BC, which was a big thing at the time, but also was also where it began to advance was with this event.
Mm-hmm.
So it's basically mostly forgotten since it was the start of the war, and as soon as the war happened, there was no kind of thoughts about it after. Until more recently, when the public apology was formed, and we were able to kind of have some redresses in that event for the event and for the people, even though 100 years ago this was when it happened.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the most important part is to memorialize and make that public memory. And you can see that in the anchor and in this memorial. So starting with the chain up top, I found it was very important to tell a story as well in a memorial. So that chain is going to be pointed out, or would be pointed out towards India,
mm-hmm.
Kind of westward in Cole Harbor, where we'd put it. And it was kind of telling the story of the distance but also the connection and the linkage between India
right.
and Canada, which
mm-hmm.
is not really thought of today as there being any linkage, or but at the time it also represents the voyage between the ship from one place to the other, and what that meant. And then you go down to the anchor, which I talked about how it represents like the importance of this story, as well as just the South Asian immigration to Canada.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have the Immigration Act, or the Continuous Journey Regulation. And that basically, I found in most memorials, they kind of talk about the event and what happened,
mm-hmm.
but I also found that having a representation or symbolism of what led up to the event
right.
Is extremely important in not only educating the viewer, but also just raising it more, making the memorial more meaningful, and
just having the whole story there.
Yeah, and really telling that story. So as you go down, the final part of the memorial is a log with an axe in it, and basically that represents is the influence that South Asian people had in Canada. So before all this regulation was made, and before kind of like the start of BC and like the lumber industry and kind of like our foundation, it was basically built upon divided into three different groups of people or ethnicities, and it was South Asian, Chinese, and white settlers. So it was mostly equal.
Mm-hmm.
It was just that two of those three were not wanted.
Mm.
As you saw as you can see in other memorials and other events that happened in our history, it's kind of that same idea of fear of them taking our jobs, or of them taking our livelihoods, kind of like the other.
Right.
But it's also important to remember that in the lumber industry, which is BC's kind of like foundational industry, the South Asian people played a large role in that beginning factor. So kind of just acknowledging that, as well as a linkage to the past, to the present,
mm-hmm.
and what would happen if there wasn't this event and this discrimination and this fear, and where would our lives be today without that fear and without that discrimination, and because they probably would have had a lot more contribution to our nation, and our nation would be completely different. I think it would be better. I think in a quote from the Prime Minister when in his apology, he said that he apologizes for the not having them as not ignoring the influence they could have had in our nation. And I think that's really important, because with all these events and all these horrible tragedies, it's also important to think about how it affects our lives today. And because here in Vancouver, there would probably be a lot less, not a lot less, but a lot more equal distribution of ethnicities. So also you can't see it in this model, but as you flip through here, you see in each of the chain links, there's a photo, or it would be like a silhouette, kind of probably more of like a steel or something silhouette of an emotion, or people, or a face with emotion, or a body feeling kind of stuck or captured, and that kind of represents the emotional connection between the viewer and the event. And you can hear about a number. You hear like 300 people that were there. Some of them died when they came back, and it's tragedy. But like, what are you gonna do? And you don't really think about it much after. But if you can feel that emotional connection, because even though it was 100 years ago, emotions were a thing since it's kind of like what makes humans humans. And having that emotional connection between this memorial and like the people that were involved, like, allows you to really understand it and like
empathize with
and be empowered to make the change, or do what you can do, or think about what you can do to make things better in your own community or society. So that's also what I noticed when I was looking at other memorials, is that individual connection is what really brings the viewer connected to the memorial and to the event. So that's the memorial, and it would be about, as you can see this model, it's about 300 centimeters or 3 meters tall, which is about like 10 feet tall. And kind of also showing how like size impacts the memorial and the significance of the event, and having that huge anchor in Cole Harbor where we would put it would make people stop and realize, like, whoa, what was this? Because it is a very looked upon event in our history.
Right. Well, cool.
Yeah.